Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Rosa and Sound Delivery Communications webinar. I'm just going to ask a quick question just to make sure everyone can hear me. So let me know if you can. Brilliant. Okay. Thank you to those who have answered. Great. If anyone is having any sound issues, do let us know as we go along. So my name is Shay, and I'm the Communications and Campaigns Manager for Rosa. Thank you all for joining us for our first webinar. Even though it is a condition of your grant, we're really happy that you've joined us. I'll be passing over to Jude a little bit, but I just wanted to say a few words. So firstly, congratulations everyone. We've got grantees here from Woman to Woman and Voices from the Front Line. So I just want to say congratulations for successfully securing a grant. The Woman to Woman Fund alone received 300 applications, so there was a lot of stiff competition. So I'm sure most of you are already aware of what Rosa does, but ours is a vision of gender equality and social justice for all women in the UK and a society which they are, safe and free from violence, achieve economic justice, enjoy good health and well-being, and have an equal voice. We typically see social change through a very different lens, a gender lens, which is what we call it. We galvanize and educate donors, we galvanize and educate donors, but we also train and network our grantees. One of the key things that we do is to connect grantees to make sure that you're all able to share in resources and information so that we're able to work towards, the wider mission. So the two grants programs that we have running regularly at Rosa is the Women to Women Fund, as I mentioned, which offers up to £25,000 to local grassroots and organisations, mainly for core costs, which makes it quite different from a lot of other funding programs. And then we also have Voices from the Front Line, which is more project-led, but it's to support charitable advocacy work across Rosa's 4 pillars, which are leadership and representation, safety, health and well-being, and economic justice. So we have some upcoming, this is our first webinar, but we have some upcoming webinars. So in September, there will be business and planning. November, there'll be financial basics. January, fundraising. March, leadership within the women's sector. And May, campaigning. I will be sending you all out registration invitations for these webinars in the next few weeks so that you have them in your diaries ahead of time. If there are any other topics that you would like to be covered, please do let me know. So just some ground rules for this webinar. If everyone can mute their microphones so that we can't hear any noise that's happening in the background for you. If there's any extra noise that you hear on our end, please let us know. Also, we'll be stopping for questions at intervals. So if you have any questions, please type them into the chat box. So all you have to do on the left-hand side of left-hand corner of your screen, there'll be a chat option there. If you just type that, if you just select that, and then you can type in your questions to us there. And I think that's it from me. I am now going to hand over to Jude Habib, who will introduce herself and tell you a lot more about how we can communicate. Jude?
Great. I'm going to treat this a little bit like a radio program. So I can't see you, but I'm just picturing you all by your desk listening to me. I used to work in radio, so that's a bit of my background. So really today is about looking at the power of communications and really thinking about how you can give your charity a voice, the people you work with a voice, and how as the women's sector we can really be confident and positive and thrive by amplifying the really amazing work you're doing around the country. I am passionate about storytelling, and I'm passionate about communications, and I'm passionate about championing stories that need to be told and challenging prejudice and stereotypes and disadvantage. And I know that a lot of that work is key to the kind of work that you're doing. So you know that I'm in the same boat as you in terms of what we're all trying to do. And I've worked with a lot of women's organisations, and I see the great work that's going on. So a little bit about me, just in a nutshell. I used to start stuff in radio. That's why I think webinars are really funny. But I used to run some of the BBC's social action campaigns. So you would have heard of Comic Relief or Children in Need, where we used to run campaigns across different parts of the BBC. If there was a storyline in a soap opera, so for example, you might all be too young for this story, but there was a domestic violence storyline in EastEnders with Little Mo, and my unit was responsible for doing all the programming to amplify that storyline. So it wasn't just on EastEnders, but domestic violence was being talked about and addressed across local radio, regional TV, and the rest of the BBC as a way of amplifying those stories. And I left, and now I run a very small organisation where we work with charities and with the people they support to communicate well and tell their stories with impact. So you know, the kind of work I've worked on recently has been working with women in Hull who have written a book on their lives, and the book was based on their experiences of extreme poverty, domestic violence, childhood sexual abuse, and addiction, which led them into street prostitution. So I supported them in the run up to the book being published and worked with them to feel confident about working with the media. I've worked with a small counselling charity where I've worked with women to record each other, and eventually after a series of workshops they've told their stories, and that was played at the House of Commons in various places. But I really think as a sector we need to be a bit more braver at telling our stories, and I understand that's not so easy, but we'll hopefully throughout the next session, throughout the session, you'll hear why I mean that we need to get braver, because ultimately if we don't tell our stories, who will? So the aim, this is what I'm hoping we're going to do. Reflect on what we're doing within our charities. I know it sounds like it's one way at the moment, but I will be taking your questions. Look at some of the challenges and opportunities and how we engage with different audiences. Today, as Shay said, it's really an introduction, so it's a getting started. So what should be in our kind of toolkit, and look at who can help us. And, you know, I can take questions where it's relevant to the things I'm talking about, or we could take questions at the end. So we'll work that out as it comes. So I hope that is all right and that you're still with me. So what's the campaign idea? You can do all these things, digital, Facebook, YouTube, but what are you going to do with them? I don't know. We'll figure out later. Bear that in mind. Just because we can doesn't mean we should. Let's see where we should be starting. So for me, there is a real movement in the charity sector to put stories and authentic stories at the heart of communications. So a few of the examples on the screen are Mind, the mental health charity, which I feel is really leading the way in terms of giving a platform to people with mental ill health. Invisible People, it's a great project in LA where a man who has experience of homelessness is walking the streets and telling stories of people with experience of homelessness. MenCap, they're doing some great work on the front line, and you'll notice that a lot of the health charities are doing things like crowdsourcing stories, crowdsourcing images. So what can we learn from them? And that's some things we're going to be talking about. There also is some good practice in terms of comms and storytelling within the women's sector. So quite a new organisation is called Agenda, and Agenda is a membership organisation, and really they're an alliance to tackle issues around women and girls at risk. And they've got a new "This Is My Story" social media campaign where storytelling is at the heart of their work. So it's worth looking at them. There's also smaller organisations like Basis in Yorkshire, and I'm going to talk about them in more detail, small organisations who are really looking at how they communicate well, who they are and what they do. And then the dynamic individuals who are sharing really interesting personal stories and really advocating for other people. So people like Sue and Siobhan, both survivors of child sexual abuse, who recognise that by telling their stories, they are the voice for people who don't have one. And people like Winnie and Madeline Black, who both have experienced rape, who again are writing about their work. So I want this to really give you a context of storytelling, communications, women voice, that, you know, we're all different. One size doesn't fit all. Some of us might be tackling difficult subjects. But I'll always say there's always a technique to be able to tell that story. So a question, it probably is me to you, and just for you just to think about yourself. Where is your charity with your communications plan? Is it under a table? Is it on the side waiting to be done, but we're just too busy delivering frontline work to be able to do that? Is it something in the pipeline, or is it something you just buried your head in the sand about? Have a think about that. Maybe a couple of you write it in your chat box, because I'd be interested. Sorry, we're just outside. It's still can see okay. So you haven't been able to see the slide. Is everyone still having problems seeing the rest of the slides? Okay, listen, don't worry about the slides. Don't worry about the slides. At the moment, we can just, as we're going through, just get a sense of where you're at. And what we can do is we can share the slides so you can see them. But can I just say, some of you were saying that the communications plan is in the pipeline. Send me that list. You're too busy. You're volunteers, so you're all too busy. So I understand that. Let's see what else people say. So generally, it looks like it's a resource thing. Volunteers are so busy. So what we need, hard to find time. So that's the overall thing at the moment where you're at. So one of the challenges is you're so busy doing the work, you're not able to talk about the work. And I would say something for us all to think about is, if we're out of the equation because people don't know we're around, if we're not, are we doing in a way our projects a disservice by not talking about them? Is that just something to think about? But what I hope I'll do is I'll be giving a range of tips that will apply to people who are volunteer led. So what are the basics you should be doing, to thinking about something a bit more longer term. I am not looking through, hopefully you can see the picture with the dog with glasses. If you can't, I'll send it to you. But I'm not looking at the issue through rosy tinted glasses. I can see the challenges, resources, time, skills. No, you can't see the dog. I'm really sorry. Okay, sorry guys, bear with me 1 second. I'm just going to try and fix this. Bear with me 1 second. so she's going to fix it. And I could keep talking, but it might be a bit distracting.
I'm just going to pause, Jude, for just 1 minute.
Right.
Has that worked? Yay, you got it. Brilliant.
Wait, let's just say, if you could see, you could see the dog.
Yep.
Let's see, can you see the next slide?
Yeah, let me move that.
Yes.
Yep.
So I don't think that was, fine. Yes. Great. I think we're there.
Okay. Technical difficulties averted. Brilliant. Yay. Thank you all.
Great. So I'm not taking for granted the things that you said to me at all about resources and time or anything like that. I accept that. Let's work it through, and hopefully you will pick things from this, what I'm talking about, that you can make happen and that you can make work. So I want to introduce you to the team from Basis in Yorkshire, and they are also a Rosa Grant recipient. So what I often do, and I think one of the things you should be thinking about as a starting point, often if I'm looking at if someone's doing well in their communications or if they're telling their stories, I might take a look at their website or their social media channels. So I think that's something we could all be spending 5 minutes on in a spare time. So I looked at them just very quickly, and this is, so these were literally in 5 minutes. This is what I saw. I saw they had a website. I saw that they were using Twitter and Facebook. In their communications online, I could see that they weren't just broadcasting who they are and what they do. I could also see that they were interacting, communicating, connecting with influencers. They were using a wide range of storytelling techniques, video, infographics, visuals, and photography. I could see their CEO was online on Twitter. So what I would say is she was showing digital leadership. And I could also see that they were responding to news, events, and awareness weeks. For example, Small Charities Week a couple of weeks ago, Volunteers Week in June. So, and also other things connected with the police and cops and prostitution. So I could see. So for me, I could see already that they had a good grasp of communications. So what can we learn from them? So what I did was I just gave them a call and I said, Amber, so these are a couple of things. There's their website. They've got a really good newsletter. They use infographics, so you can see what a bit of their work. Really lovely. Produced on something called Canva, which is free, which I'll tell you about in a minute. They use visuals, thank their volunteers, and also, as you can see, really compelling visual storytelling that they can share online in their social channels. So how do they do it? So I spoke to Amber at Basis Yorkshire, and she gave me these ideas, and I thought I'd just share them with you because that's the easiest way. So as a starting point, they used a platform called Know How Nonprofit, which is part of NCVO, and that gave them literally a step-by-step way to going through a communication strategy. I've had a look at it. I think it's really a really fantastic resource. Very simple and really is a step-by-step guide. So even if you've got limited time, you're run by volunteers, it can be done in stages. And as Amber said to me, it's taken them as an organisation time, but it has been really worth spending time on developing their strategy. The other thing that any good communication strategy or plan has to have, it's got to be led by CEO, trustees, senior management team, or senior volunteers if you're just a volunteer-led organisation. You need, communications is vital, and and it's not an added extra. It's if you're delivering frontline services or services, it's not a little bit of bother at the side. It's absolutely core to us being able to deliver good service and advocate for the women we're working with. So they've had strong buy-in from the CEO, and they've had capacity. They've had a dedicated individual, although only 1 day a week maximum, to work on the communications. Amber also did tell me that one of her role is to make sure that other members of staff are given training, given social media training, volunteers are given training, so that they're also more confident around the communications. But also they do an analysis of the things they're sharing. So this for some might be, well over the next stage, but even within Twitter and Facebook, you can see who's liking or connecting with you, and that helps you understand what works and who your audience is. She also, this isn't in any particular order, but the different elements of their communications plan include making sure that they've got a really range of different types of content, and that's something I really picked up earlier. That they talk about funding. They had one of their projects won a Diana Award last week. They champion what they're doing. They're doing service user voice. They talk about their achievements. They share their resources, and they talk about their work regularly. So it's not like once a week or once. They're consistent in their messaging. They link to things across the year, which I talked about. So all the things that's on the list are things that I noticed, and that really reinforces that they are using their communications well. I would say, and the one thing that I've said to them, because it'll be interesting if you go and do your own audit on them, you look at it yourself, I think they could be doing more within their communications to give their service user a voice and give the women a voice. I think that's the thing that I would amplify and do more of. But otherwise, I think they're a really good example of an organisation we could be emulating in time. I know some of you are volunteers, but this just gives me an idea. She also shared some of her favourite communications tools. So she uses, as an organisation in Amber, they use something called TweetDeck. TweetDeck is a social media management tool. I personally use something called Hootsuite, where I can share and schedule tweets and posts along other social media channels. And I know Rosa uses Buffer, but they are kind of ways that you can schedule and share and listen. Also in Twitter, I think often charities that I find don't use Twitter lists very much. And Twitter lists is where you can add people into a list and just see what kind of conversations they're having. From an e-news perspective, MailChimp is a free tool that's quite user-friendly. They use Pictochart, which is low cost, and Canva, which is largely free. Their WordPress is their website, and then they also use guest blogs on other websites. So I don't want you to feel overwhelmed by the things that they're doing, but what I want you to think about is, are there any tools that you can take away from this that you can look at? Even if you look at a couple of them, and I would say things like Canva, you can make some really, I worked with an amazing girl who uses it so well. And I've picked it up, and actually, as someone who wasn't most technical, have been able to pick up Canva really well, and you can create some really beautiful images and very shareable visuals. So where are the opportunities? Some other opportunities for small organisations is to is to, when we talk about tracking hashtags, I'm presuming people know that hashtags are where you can bring together a community of conversations. So if you're looking at coercive control or violence against women, if you do a hashtag coercive control or hashtag VAW, you'll see the conversations that are going on topics that you might be addressing. Hashtag CSE, childhood sexual abuse, child sexual exploitation, CSA, child sexual abuse. So what it helps you to do as a small organisation is to connect with other like-minded organisations and help you join in the conversations. Something else that's smaller as a way that we can punch above our weight and to be part of the conversations that we're dealing with is often there might be a TV or radio programme which might be around the subjects that you're dealing with. So, for example, Channel 4 a couple of weeks ago broadcast a programme, To Catch a Killer, which was all about coercive control, domestic violence. And yet what I found was many of the, even big organisations, weren't having conversations or connecting with the audience at that time online. And I think those are opportunities that we could be talking about, maybe some questions at the end about how do you as small organisations be part of those conversations so that you can really amplify the work you're doing. I often say to people that at a weekend, one volunteer or one member of staff can look at what's going on in the, look at the listings for at the weekend papers, and you can see what kind of things are coming up. And if things like that happen, you can possibly approach your local radio station, say there's a program coming up, it's our area of interest, our area of expertise. Is this something we can talk about? And I know for many people and many organisations and many women's organisations, the media is very frightening. So the media part of your communications. So I would say there are so many tools now in your mobile phone that you can actually start capturing content yourself. And I'll talk about that in a minute with an example. So that was kind of just some things for you to think about in terms of communications and starting to plan. Is there, maybe it's a good time to just see where you're at and ask them, see how you're feeling about that. Is it overwhelming what I'm saying, or is it starting to does it make sense? Any thoughts on that? Let's have a think. Or you're all still listening? Great, so some good ideas. Yeah, and I think good. So it's making sense. Our counsellors often recount. Okay, so that's really interesting. So someone's talking about counselling clients often reluctant to tell their story, and that's fair enough. You know, some people are not ready to tell their story, and I'm just going to do a little bit where I tell you that I've actually worked in a counselling service, running a storytelling project, and it actually takes time. So it actually takes time to build trust and build relationships, but it's not impossible. And it's actually about finding the right tool. What is the right tool, storytelling tool, to help that person tell their story? And I'm going to talk about that in a minute. But time's still an issue. I completely understand. What you have to do when time is an issue is do something. And you've got to think about what that something is, and we can go through some ideas, and you can think, if you take away and go, okay, I am going to look at the NCVO plan with my team, trustees, so there'll be other people. If we're going to prioritise that at a meeting and just spend a few hours on that, that would be great. And The other thing I would say is if you're going to take one thing, so like you have a drop-in day for some of the people you're working with, and they on a piece of paper write some thoughts about the impact you're having on them. These can then be turned into some visual storytelling. So we'll come back to some ideas. So my thing is thinking about when was the last time you asked someone you support to tell their story. So that as part of your communications. So I'm going to talk a bit about storytelling. So for me, alongside your communications and very integrated into your communications is the role that first-hand narrative and storytelling plays. And I think that working with women and building their confidence so that they can tell their stories in their own ways and in their own words can be extremely powerful. And what's great is a lot of the tools are low cost, and also a lot of the tools are accessible. So, for example, Winnie, who I mentioned earlier, who is a survivor of a terrible rape, she started telling her story first anonymously using a blog. There are others who, Madeline, and has also turned her. Later on, she did start talking about it, but then turned to the written word to write a book. So I'm not telling you all to write books, but I think writing down things for some people is a starting point. Some people are happy to use audio. So, for example, the women I worked with at the Maya Centre, which is a counselling service, a small charity counselling service in North London, who had never told first-hand stories. We did a pilot workshop where just sound was the tool we used, and it was really successful. I didn't necessarily know their experiences or anything about them, but we built trust to the point where by the end of the 6-week session, they recorded their stories, and it was incredible. And in fact, they've just put them live this week on the website, so I'll be able to show them to you so you can have a listen yourself. Some people are confident with video. So you had Siobhan at the beginning, who runs this project called Beam Project. She's a survivor of child sexual abuse. She started telling her story through film, through the project Fixers, which is a charity project. And she now has a YouTube channel where she has turned the camera on herself in order to tell her story and share insights and share perspectives, things like that. So these are how the tools, different storytelling tools, are being used by different people. So we talked a bit about mind. Mind is huge. You're small. I'm not comparing you to them. But what we can do is we can learn. What can we learn from some of the health charities? So really, I mean, I love Mind. I look at their constitution, I look at their vision, I look at their mission, and I go, I want to be like them. And it's really the people they are there, they exist for, are at the heart of everything they do. And they're very open. They do calls out for stories. They speak to people, and they invite people with mental ill health to use the Mind platform to share their story. And it's compelling. And they now have video blogs, and they're all, so it's I'm quite old fashioned. So it's kind of often simple storytelling techniques, writing, the written word, video. So things that you will have access to, whatever size of your organization. But it's worth taking a look at what they're doing. And I think there's a page that says your stories. So if you do Mind blogs or Mind storytelling, you can see what they're doing in terms of inviting people to tell your story, how you can blog or blog for Mind. And they give tools and they give ideas. So I'm not actually telling you to do it, to have to reinvent the wheel. It's really important to look at what other organizations can do. And you can just copy, use some of their tools and their resources and rework it for you. But I think they're good in the way of what they're doing in terms of inviting, and I think that's made a sea change in how mental health is seen in terms of challenging the stereotypes and stigmas. And you can see some of, grief, taboos. I'm sure a lot of you are tackling mental health through some of the projects that you're doing, some form of mental ill health. So it's good to look at some of the things that they're doing. I want you to meet my friend Barbara. I love Barbara. She's this most amazing social entrepreneur who hadn't until very recently told her story. Barbara was in prison a few years ago, and she came out of prison with this amazing social enterprise idea that she was going to create a project that was going to train women to understand how to make lingerie, and so that they could eventually set up their own franchises and create jobs from them. Called Behind Bras. You must look it up. It's very new. So Barbara was very nervous about telling her story. She's happy to talk about the project and things like that. But her resistance was from family, like some of her older children, about why are you telling, they were finding it difficult. But I think she realized that she had this purpose. She wanted to help other women. She saw what was going on inside, and that this was her ultimate purpose. And that ultimately, she wanted to share her story to in order to really show her credentials for why the business was important and invaluable for women. So she started off by blogging. And in fact, she wrote her first blog for me. Sound Delivery has got a blog site, but she's now subsequently gone on to blog as a guest blogger for other organisations working in the criminal justice system. So if you want to get your story out or the work you're doing, and you might not have your own blog, there are ways that you can be blogging for other organisations. And look out for Barbara, she's amazing. So we talked a bit about audio storytelling, and in fact, I thought I could do this, but I realised I can't. I was going to play you a little audio clip, but it doesn't work. But I'll send you the clip. But as I was saying before, audio was something that the charity, who'd never done storytelling before, felt confident and comfortable with. Audio can be anonymous. The women were very much in control of their stories. They could say as much or as little. What we did was, after we did the interviews, I edited them, and then the women got the full interview, and then they got the unedited version. Got the full unedited version, and then they got the edited version, and they could decide what they wanted to put back or what was missing. And I felt a real, I don't do this work lightly. I will never put someone in a vulnerable position. I'll never put someone in danger. I've always got women's interests at heart. I've always got their interests at heart, and you have to be trusting with people's stories. And it worked really well, that process. And a couple of weeks ago, I was in Hull, and I worked with a small charity who work with women who want to exit prostitution. And we used audio. So in preparation for the book coming out, I did some media training with the women, and that also included I recorded some of them myself for them to get practice telling their story with me. I didn't give them a hard time. I wasn't Jeremy Paxman, and most of the time journalists won't be Jeremy Paxman because they want to nurture you. Not everyone is there to stitch you up. And we actually, for this project, we approached a couple of friendly journalists on Radio Humberside, on the World Service, who all broadcast this. But the most exciting thing was we approached Women's Hour with the content we already produced, and we said that they could have exclusive access to the story. So actually, the women weren't live on Women's Hour. The pre-recorded interviews I recorded were on Women's Hour, and the women felt that their story was being told in this way, and it was quite a safe way of doing it. But what I love most is that someone heard it and reviewed it and said that their stories stopped her in her tracks, and we need to stop people in their tracks with the work we're doing, because you are doing amazing work. So video, for some people, video is an absolute no-no. With we're working with women, we're working on difficult subjects. Siobhan just proves that's not always the case, and video is still something people look at and click onto. And often I find it's women who aren't necessarily affiliated to any charity or anything like that, but have a situation. And I think now some people are more confident about putting their lives online, that they turn the camera on themselves. So you've got someone like Siobhan, but I've seen a number of stories of women who have survived of domestic violence where there's been a more physical injury, where they've actually turned the camera on themselves. And the Clear Lines Festival was a festival that Winnie created a couple of years ago, and it was the first festival on sexual consent, and it was amazing. And what they did was it was crowdfunded, and for every crowdfunder, so crowdfunding is when you're raising money for a project from your network, and every good crowdfunder needs a compelling video. And they actually got a number of people who shared their experience of sexual assault, and it was really compelling, and it helped show that there are people who want to speak out, especially for those who can't speak out, but also it enabled them to raise funds to put this festival on. So it's not gratuitous telling stories. We need to think about why we're doing it, who we're doing it for, who our audience is. So we do need to think about what we're doing, but it's just a very powerful part of your communications. So we talked about visual storytelling. And so if audio and video are just too far along, you're not ready for that stage, well, how about we just use a simple idea that you're running a session, people are coming to you, you get them to write some quotes, and then you use a tool like Canva to illustrate them. And you could create a very simple template using Canva. So, for example, when the book The Women from Hull came out, I asked the project manager from the funder to just write a little quote. So, as you can see, it's visual and shareable on social media, and we used Canva. And then if you don't want a picture in it, this was a quote from one of the women that we used, and we turned it into a visual. So it's a branded visual with the funder and the name of the organisation. You've got hashtags so you can encourage people to take part in the conversation, and you've got the name of the person. So I'm going to just stop there and just check on you so far. Those things are useful? Is it giving you ideas? Is it something that you think, what some of those things I like that. Well, Liz, you're going to check out Canva, definitely. Great, that's what I like to hear. So it's also just small steps. Today is I'm just trying to give you everything that's in my head to help you, but it's very much about okay. So it's very much about what would be further for you, and later on we'll talk about using the media. So what about service users whose first language isn't English? Could the visual storytelling be in another language? Could you work with them and a translator and think about how that they can tell their stories in their own language? I mean, I think that you'd need to think about if someone wants to tell their story and the story is in another language, there are a few things you can do. You can get them to do it in their own language and then get it translated and voice it over. So maybe someone from that country who does speak English can then do a voiceover, and that could be mixed in something like Audacity, which is an editing tool. So don't rule out that there will be ways to help if people's first language isn't English. And someone said images are really important. Images are really important, but images don't necessarily always have to be of a person. But again, don't rule out that they might not be happy to take their photos. We need to ask. People could say no. Never insist if they're unsure. Show them examples. Okay, so one of the things that the Beta Yorkshire talked about, and that I'm really committed to, and that I see other organisations are committed to, and for example, someone there talked about, but we're all volunteers. It's all of our responsibility to be communicating who we are and telling the story of the organisation. So one of the things some of the mental health charities have done, they've got together like Time to Change and Mind and Rethink, and they do something called Story Camp. So once a year, they bring some of their ambassadors who are already telling their stories in some way, and they bring them together, and then they upskill them, and they train them. So skills-based training. So if you're a volunteer-led organisation, try and find someone who's got comms or storytelling or social media skills and build those volunteers' confidence so that communications is part of and storytelling is just part of their volunteering role. So yeah, training is really important, and there will always be someone within your network who will be able to help, or pro bono support, or things like the Media Trust do something like called media matching, so that they can find you a media mentor. So look at where the opportunities are for you. Let's see. Nothing. It's always a glitch. Yeah, so one of the other things that I talked about a bit earlier, and it's something for us to think about, even if we're smaller organisations, is how can you get stories and content from your network? So what can we learn, for example, from the Cancer Right Now campaign, where people who are going through cancer are sharing their images and their photos and things like that. It doesn't necessarily have to be images, but by asking people, what's the impact of our organisation? Or tell us what inviting people to do an action for you, that might be a visual or might be, a piece of content. So let me give you some examples. So in this case, it's visual photography. And a lot of the cancer organisations are now emulating this. But it doesn't have to be a visual. So as you can see, the National Deaf Children's Society, they wanted to get some tips from parents that they could share on a Friday. So they had Friday tips. So as you can see, a nicely branded, colourful, but just a quote, which, as you can see on the side, was widely shared. They also did something which I've always loved and used a lot in training, is they had a campaign called the Stolen Futures campaign. So they were cut to disabled, they were cut to services for deaf and visually impaired children. And they had something called a Stolen Futures campaign. So what they did was they took photos of they asked parents, who were their primary audience, what will your child wants to be when they grow up? Would you take a photo of your child and just tell us what he wants to be when he grows up? And they created these really, really lovely visuals. I mean, we know, and the reality is, women's services are being cut And we've got to understand how vital they are within our communities. Again, if we're not talking about the reality of what is going on the ground, because we're so busy doing lots of other things, and I accept that, but if we're not doing that, communities won't appreciate the invaluable work your organisations are doing. And there's me, because obviously I like to join in things, you know. If people ask me to do a selfie, no, to be honest, I generally don't do this, but I was so compelled by this storyline in The Archers, where you must have heard that there was a ongoing domestic violence storyline. Helen stabbed Rob, and there was all a big saga, and it was going on for months. Which one is me? I'm the one with the mug with the purple black hair on the left. And so I said I'd like to be the model. No, I'm joking. And so basically they crowdsourced images from their audience, and they said, we want to show solidarity to Helen, who was in prison, who was going to court because she was stabbed her abusive boyfriend. And people joined in using the hashtag solidarity. So there are ways of doing things to crowdsource content from your donors, supporters, network. So you will find the right approach. So that's solidarity. I mean, this for me is exciting, but I think people then get nervous. But again, we've got to trust people. We've got to trust the people we're working with, that, you know, we're doing things together. So one of the things that you might look at is something called a social media takeover. So I ultimately would hope that you would have the basic channels, a website, Twitter and Facebook as a starting point. Obviously, some will have more, some will have less, but I think that's a starting point. So a social media takeover is when you hand over your channel for a day, a week, a weekend to someone who is a storyteller for your organisation. So if you look at the hashtag at NHS, every week they give the NHS account to someone who can talk about an aspect of the NHS, from a surgeon to a cancer patient to someone with diabetes. And so through that, we're learning about the richness of the NHS. So it's something we could do ourselves, something worth looking at. Often the starting point is looking at what is people are doing and then seeing what is realistic for us. So hope you're not all too overwhelmed. How do we get started? Okay, I think my starting point for you is to look at the NCBO communications plan, just to, because I think having something as a basis for all those other things and all the other stories, I think is something that would be important to you. And this is whether you are volunteer led or got one member of staff, you might get a group of friends who can help you with it. But I would say to succeed and be sustainable alongside a business plan, your communications plan is really important. It's who you are, what you do, it's your messages, it's your vision. It doesn't have to be very long, but it will help guide you and frame your work. I would say think about where storytelling comes into that. I would look at what skills you have within your organisation. So do a skills audit. Who's good on Twitter? Who takes photographs in their spare time? How can we link together all these tools? You'll always find someone whose son, uncle, brother, sister loves making videos in their spare time, or loves editing, or loves music. So look at where we are and look at where we've got, and how can we harness the skills that we've got in our organisations. Ask the people you're there to advocate for. um, think about how they can tell their stories. Ask, show them how other people are telling their stories. Approach them to think about, this is something you might want to do. So, for example, I'm working with a small homelessness charity in a couple of weeks' time. Very small, understaffed, lots of volunteers. And in a few weeks' time, we're going to work alongside them. They're going to do it, but we've got a tiny bit of funding to support them. We're going to be doing 24 hours in the life of the hostel and their work as a homelessness charity. So we're starting to plan it all together. So there might be points that you think in a few weeks' time, or we've got something coming up, or we've got an anniversary, or a campaign, or think about where some of the things I've been talking about, like Twitter takeovers or crowdsourcing or things like that, might fit into something that you've got coming up. It's all about relationship building. I would also, one of the other things I was saying at the beginning is for example, look at Basis Yorkshire, look at what they're doing. I'm sure Rosa will, you might have each other's email addresses or website addresses, so you might look at what each other's doing and help each other as a peer group to support each other on your communications and storytelling journey. And it's about everyone. And when I talk about the whole organisation, that is from volunteers to your trustees, to your chief exec, to other stakeholders, your donors, your hopefully corporate partners. People really care, and people care, they want to get it right. And someone mentioned consent forms. Always have really robust consent forms and be informed about consent. I think I've got something that I can send you. Do you have a precedent consent form for a written narrative? I can look at what I've got, and I can send it to Shay, and she can send it to you. But I also think, having written, so for example, the women in the Maya Centre, they wrote their consent forms on day one of the project. But really for me, even by the last day of the project, I was still, even though they'd written their consent forms, they'd gone for another 6 weeks with me. So I had to really remind them that they could, it was still down to them what they decided to do. They were in charge. And I wanted to make sure they had informed consent. And I think it was when I was with the CEO of the charity, a psychologist, and the women, and they all saying, still 6 weeks later, we want it to be on YouTube, we want it to be out there. I was sure that the consent was informed. And I think ultimately it's thinking about making your stories key to your comms. So I hope that, trying to think there. So for me, there's lots of great support out there for you. Obviously, Rosa is here for you, and they've got tools, and they can share ideas with you. For wider support from peers, there's the Third Sector PR and Communications Network. It's a Facebook group. It's a closed group, so it means you have to, if you find it, Third Sector PR and Communications Network, sign up to it, and then they'll let you in. My friend Kirsty is the community manager, so if there's any problems, let me know, and I'll nag her. But it's a great group, organisations all shapes and sizes. If you've got a question or a problem or an issue, there is 3,000 plus people there to help you. Obviously, you're all around the country, so I don't know what local groups are, but you might find local charity meetups and things like that, or create your own. Charity meetup is something in London where you can meet face to face, and there's also things like Bar Camp that's once a year, and NFP Tweet Up. Again, those are all charity-led comms, fundraising, PR meetups where people are sharing ideas. The Small Charities Coalition, I think, is great. and also the NCVO guides online are great too. So I think to help you, don't be overwhelmed. There's just taking a few small steps, I think would really help get you started. So what are your next steps? What are your next steps? You tell me. So I'm here now for questions and to share ideas together. Great. Liz, you get my gold star. Mm-hmm. She's going through the NCVO guide to communication strategy with your trustees. It is free. You don't have to pay for NCVO membership. And I think that's a really good starting point for you, Liz. And Amanda, we'll share the link to the NCVO guide. I think I might ask, we'll share that to you shortly, so you've got it. And I think plan small steps. Your next step should be a small step. Give yourself time. Don't put pressure on yourself. But know from my perspective that it's vital. And because I totally believe in what you do, that this something will aid you, not restrict you. And I think it's something that will be really useful. So, are there any other questions? Anything I can help with? I feel like I'm all on my own. Oh, great. So, if you follow @Sound Delivery, we've been sharing highlights and links from the webinar on Twitter. We've also curated like a little PDF guide where Winnie and Siobhan and all the stories, some of the stories of people I've been talking about are featured. So you can meet them yourself and let them know I pointed you their way, and Barbara and people like that. I think it's a challenging time to be a women's organisation at the moment. But I also think there are huge amounts of opportunities for the work we're doing and talking about the work we're doing, being part of the conversation and leading the conversation. I think that's what's exciting about what role social media plays, is that you can be leading the conversations about the work you're doing. So great. You're going to be using Canva. Looking at your plan. I'm really glad that I've helped, and I'm on Twitter as well, Sound Delivery and @GTB, and always happy to help or share tips, or if you're doing great content, or if you've got something you wanna say you did some fantastic work, I'm always happy to help you amplify it. We want to talk about your work. But unless we know what's going on, or you're telling us, then that's it. So I think let's just check. Any other further final questions? If not,
okay, great. I think I can speak for everyone to say that was a really brilliant session from Jude. So thank you so much for doing this. I want to say that the webinar will actually be available on the Rosa website next week. So you can revisit some of the things that Jude has said. I also want to introduce you all to Rosa's new grant manager, Anne. She's going to say a quick hello. Some of you have probably already spoken with her, but this is who you'll probably be speaking with going forward. So
yeah, hello, I'm Anne, and I started at Rosa a couple of weeks ago. I'm really looking forward to working with you all, and you should have my details on the email that you got about this webinar. So you've got my phone number and my email address there, so do get in touch. I look forward to it.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you all for joining us for our first webinar. We will see you at the next one.